Stock judging competitions are an essential part of the YFC programme, as the organisation has its roots in agriculture. By training and competing, you can learn new skills, enhance your existing ones, and represent your club at county, area or national level. In stock judging competitions, you will usually need to place 4 animals or carcasses in order, and then give reasons to the judge to explain your order. You need to have sound observations and an understanding of an animal's makeup and what the industry requires. This understanding will help you explain your order and give accurate reasons. Reason giving will enhance your public speaking skills and increase your confidence of speaking in front of others. This competition is a prime example of putting the YFC ethos, fun, learning and achievement, into practice. This DVD will explain what to look for and explain which part of the animal or carcasses are most important. These skills are important for livestock farmers, as there are constant pressures to match animals to meet market demands. Whether you're judging live animals or carcasses, stand back and have a look at the group from a distance. Make a judgment by eye and then confirm by handling if possible. Marks are distributed as follows: 50 marks for a correct order. The judges put different points between the animals and then use a ready reckoner to work out the score for any others that vary from theirs. 25 points for observations. This is for giving detailed and accurate observations. 15 comparisons. Now these are easy marks. Ensure you compare between the animals. You get 10 marks for style and ability, so dress smart and wear an ironed white coat. Remember, style is visual as well as delivery. Giving reasons. You will have 2 minutes to give your reasons on the group. Ensure you give as much information as you can within the 2 minutes, but don't go over the time, as you will incur time penalties. Stand up straight and look the judge in the eye. Be confident, as you need to convince the judge that you are right. Describe the stock fully, going through the animals or carcasses in a logical order, front to back or back to front, but use the same style for all animals in the class. Refer to any distinguishing features and compare as much as possible between the animals. For example, A was longer in length than B, but shorter than X and Y. Try to use the full time allocated. Give your reasons clearly and try to memorise them as much as possible. Start giving your reasons with a good morning, good afternoon or good evening, Mr. or Madam Judge. These are my reasons for placing this class of whatever it is in the following order, making sure of course that you check your order matches your card. At the end of your reasons, finish by saying, "Those, Mr. or Madam Judge, are the reasons why I have placed this class in this particular order." When you get more confident in your reasons, you can say more about your order. For example, I felt there were 2 pairs in the class, A and B, and X and Y. Or there was a clear first place A, with a pair in the middle, B and X, and a clear last place. Or there may be a clear first or last, then the 3 animals closer matched. Just say what you see. You don't have to say who you are, where you come from, and who you represent, as this only wastes valuable time and this information will be on your card. Look for length, width and depth of fleshing throughout. Draw an imaginary line from the shoulder to the back leg hock. You want there to be as much meat above the line as possible, as these are the expensive cuts. The animal should be neat and compact with a broad, well-developed shoulder with plenty of fleshing. It is bad if the animal is narrow and is lacking flesh over the shoulder. The brisket needs to be light and not broad, as this is wasteful. The ribs should be well sprung and trim, not soft, as this indicates it is fatty. The belly or underline should be clean, with no waist and parallel with the top line. The chine should be full of fleshing and not weak and lacking flesh. The loin needs to be full, long and deep and not narrow and lack fleshing. The round, or hindquarters, should be well fleshed in the first and second thigh, and the muscle development should carry well down into the hock. Ideally look for width to the rear and for it to be well rounded in the rump, and an animal that is evenly balanced, well proportioned, with conformation and fleshing throughout. The following sequence is an example of giving reasons for a class of live beef cattle.
Mr. Judge, these are my reasons for placing this class of 4 butcher's beasts in the order A, B, X and Y. I placed A first, this being the large black steer in the class, and I felt the outstanding steer in the class today, having length and width throughout and quantity and quality of fleshing throughout, being well filled over the shoulder, having width and depth of loin, having the best loin in the class today. Plenty of length through the stake pieces and good width through the hindquarters, carried well down to the first and second round. Being reasonably clean through the underline with an even degree of finish throughout, and would produce a quality carcass well suited to today's trade. I placed B second, this being the red steer in the class, a steer of similar type to my first beast A, though I felt was just tending to carry a little more weight through the forequarter and a little bit more waist through the forequarter. Being neat and filled over the shoulder, good width and depth of loin, but not quite having the depth of loin compared to my first beast A. Showing good width through the hindquarters, but didn't quite carry the fleshing down through the hindquarters compared to A, and that was the main reason for placing it second. Overall, this beast would produce a quality carcass, but not quite carrying the abundance of fleshing that my first beast A would do. I placed X third, this being the black white-faced steer in the class, smallest steer in the class today, being quite a well-balanced steer, but just lacked the quantity and quality of fleshing compared to my previous 2. Being neat and compact over the shoulder, reasonably well filled over the loin, but not having the quantity of fleshing of loin compared to my first 2 beasts. Not having the fullness and development through the hindquarters compared to my first 2 beasts, but being reasonably clean through the underline, and when hung up, it produced a well-balanced carcass, but one lacking in quality cuts. Placed Y last and had very little hesitation in doing so, this being the small black steer in the class, a steer just lacking quantity and quality of fleshing throughout. Although being reasonably long, didn't have the width or fullness of fleshing compared to the other 3 steers in the class today. Lacked development through the loin, having by far the weakest loin in the class, and by far the weakest hindquarter in the class with very little flesh. Very clean through the underline and very lean, in fact not really carrying enough degree of finish to allow it to be slaughtered, and really is just a good store beast. So those, Mr. Judge, are my reasons for placing this class of 4 butcher's beasts in the order A, B, X and Y.
To judge finished lamb, look for lambs with a high killing out percentage. They should have a good flesh covering throughout and have a short neck with little waist, with well-proportioned shoulders for potential eye muscle development. They should have prime spring of rib. The body should be broad with width and depth of fleshing over the loin, with fleshing over the chump and through the leg to the hock. You don't want there to be excess fat covering or poor flesh covering, and you don't want narrow legs or heavy shoulders. Fat coverage is best assessed over the ribs and the dock. The following sequence is an example of giving reasons for a class of live lambs.
Good afternoon, Mr. Judge and Madam Steward. I placed these 4 butcher's lambs in the order A, B, X and Y. I felt there was a pair in the class today, A and B and X and Y. I placed A first. This was a wether lamb in the class and also the lamb with a slightly split ear. I felt this lamb would have the best killing out percentage of the class today, being a well-balanced lamb, being light over the shoulder, short-necked, with length in the top line and a prime spring of rib. The loin was wide and deep and was full of fleshing. This led into a well-fleshed chump, which led into a full meaty leg down to the hock. This lamb would produce a carcass ideal for today's trade. I placed B second. This was a darker faced female lamb and the shortest lamb in the class today. She was a balanced lamb, similar to A, being light over the shoulder, but she carried less fleshing through the loin and carried less fleshing through the leg down to the hock. Overall, this lamb lacked the fullness of fleshing of my previous lamb A. Third, I placed X. This is another wether lamb in the class today. He was similar in length to A, but lacked the overall balance of my previous 2, A and B. He was narrow over the shoulders and carried less width and fleshing over the loin and chump. Although he handles reasonably well in the leg, he lacks the fullness of fleshing of A and B, and so when hung up would produce a poorer carcass than my previous two. I placed Y fourth, another male lamb and another long lamb similar to A and X, but not balanced and lacking fleshing throughout. He was narrower throughout, having the weakest shoulder and loin in the class today, and when cut through would have the smallest eye muscle. When handling over the leg, he lacked the fullness in the leg and the fleshing. This lamb was a lean lamb and ideal for further finishing. Therefore, Mr. Judge, I place these 4 butcher's lambs in the order A, B, X and Y.
Standing back from the carcasses so that you can view them all from a distance will enable you to assess the length and width of the carcasses and compare them. You're looking for a balanced carcass which is not too heavy in the forequarter and not over fat. It should be well proportioned, with tremendous length, width and depth of fleshing throughout the hindquarters to the hock. The rump should be well rounded and blend into the top and silverside cuts. The loin should be deep and well fleshed into a meaty chine. The ribs should be well sprung with a neat forequarter. The shoulders should have plenty of width and not be too heavy, and there should be little waste in the brisket. If the carcasses are cut through, the eye muscle should be large, deep, and be a cherry red colour with fine texture and with little fat marbling through the meat. For beef carcasses, the current grading system for carcasses in the UK and Europe uses the Europe classification for conformation and a numeric assessment for fatness. These are in classes 1 to 5. Combining scores for conformation and fat determines the classification and indicates the market most suited for each type of carcass. Aim for most animals to fall within the green shaded area where there is the greatest demand and highest prices. Here's an example of giving reasons for beef carcasses.
Good afternoon, Mr. Judge. After inspecting these 4 fine butcher's beef carcasses, I have placed them in order Y, X, A and B. I place Y first, because in my mind this is by far the superior carcass in the class here today, possessing the most overall sheer volume of fleshing throughout the top side and silver side, down through into by far the superior rump in the class here today. This beast in my mind possesses the most overall sheer volume of fleshing throughout the choice cuts in the hind quarter. This then leads on to by far the superior loin in the class. Perhaps not the longest loin in the class here today, but a loin with by far the best width and depth of development in the class here today, complemented by the sheer quality and size of the eye muscle. This then leads on into a neat full balanced shoulder. Overall, I felt this carcass an ideal fat cover for today's trade, and so I had no hesitation in placing it first. X I placed second, a carcass I felt that had slightly more length through the hind quarter than my previous, but not the depth and width of development, not the volume of fleshing through the top and silver, not the fullness through the rump compared to my previous. This then leads on into a lot longer loin than my previous, but not the width and depth of fleshing through the loin compared to my previous. This is complemented by a smaller eye muscle, again leading into a well balanced full shoulder, and just this carcass is just fat enough, I thought, for today's trade, but just not lacking the overall volume of fleshing throughout the hind quarter. I had to place a second. A I placed third, a comparable carcass in development compared to my previous, perhaps slightly wider through the top and silver side, perhaps better development through the rump, but not the volume of fleshing through the rump, not the depth of fleshing through the rump compared to my previous. This then led on into a lot shorter loin, but a loin with better width and depth of fleshing, which is complemented by the size of the eye muscle. But the poorest thing on the eye muscle in this carcass is the level of fat, being excessively fat through the eye muscle and down over a fatter shoulder. A balanced shoulder, but this carcass I felt was just fat enough for today's trade, and that's why it's had to go third. B I placed last, the poorest conformation carcass in the class here today, the least development through the top side and silver side, the poorest development through the rump, and down through by far the narrowest loin in the class here today. The least development through the eye muscle, the smallest eye muscle in the class, and into a balanced shoulder. Still a very saleable carcass with ideal fat cover, but just lacking the volume of fleshing throughout the choice cuts. I had to place it last. And those, Mr. Judge, are my reasons for placing the 4 butcher's beef carcasses in order Y, X, A and B.
When assessing lamb carcasses, stand back so you can look at them all from a distance. Ideally, look for a balanced carcass which has a high volume of saleable meat without excessive fat covering, with a high ratio of lean meat to fat. You want a carcass with width and fullness of fleshing in the leg to the hock, and to be full and round in the chump. The loin should have width and length and carry a full depth of fleshing. The carcass should have an excellent spring and cover over the rib. If the carcass is cut through, the eye muscle should be large and show the prime colour and texture without too much fat covering. The shoulders should be neat, compact, with little waste. Overall, the best carcass should show the greatest volume of meat in the choice cuts. For lamb carcasses, the current grading system for carcasses in the UK and Europe uses the Europe classification for conformation and a numeric assessment for fatness. These are in classes 1 to 5. Combining scores for conformation and fat determines the classification and indicates the market most suited for each type of carcass. Aim for most animals to fall within the green shaded area where there is the greatest demand and highest prices. Here's an example of giving reasons for lamb carcasses.
Good afternoon, Mr. Judge, Mr. Steward. Today I placed my ring of 4 lamb carcasses in the order B, A, Y and X. I had no hesitation in placing B first. Whilst this was the leanest carcass of the class today, I felt that it had the most outstanding fleshing in the legs. It was the deepest, widest and most convex in the chump. It was well sprung in the loin and had the biggest eye muscle with the deepest colour of the class today. This carcass was neat in the shoulder and overall I placed it first because I felt it had the greatest volume of meat in the prime quality cuts. I placed A second. This carcass lacked the depth of fleshing of B. It was narrower in the chump and it lacked convexity in the chump. It was shorter in the loin. Although its eye muscle colouring was as deep, the size of it was not as big. This was a fatter carcass, potentially a more commercial meat to fat ratio than my previous. However, I felt that it had to go down because it lacked the volume of meat of carcass B. I placed Y third, the longest carcass of the class today. It had a greater depth of fleshing in the leg. However, its chump lacked depth and width of carcass A and it had visible fat. It was longer in the loin. It had a smaller eye muscle. This carcass was fatter than my previous, although not over fat, and was coarser in the shoulder. I placed X last. This was the shortest carcass of the class today. It had excellent conformation in the legs, however it had the shortest chump and the shortest loin of the class today. It was the fattest carcass of the class and overall lacked the volume of meat. And those, Mr. Judge, are my reasons for placing my ring of 4 lamb carcasses in the order B, A, Y and X.
Stock judging is a great competition which not only develops your stock skills, it helps you understand which traits are desirable for the modern trade. Explaining to a judge why you put the stock in a certain order helps you develop your public speaking skills and builds confidence of speaking in front of others. Being able to compare the stock rather than just describing each animal is also another skill which you develop with time. And being able to give full reasons within 2 minutes is certainly a task for some.